Right.
Thanks a lot.
I gotta give it. Why do you get a day off with Mario?
So really?
Yeah.
So I did.
Yeah. We'll see. Not BDM or
Probably make it happen.
You go, Matt?
Good, yeah.
Not too bad.
Good.
Okay, good to see you. Good, sir. How are you? Good, living the dream.
Totally integrated in the city.
That's the goal. Yeah.
Doing my best.
The weather's finally turning around.
I'm well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just glad it's, weather's gonna turn around. We do need more water though. The lake down Wednesday.
Hi, Bill.
They said,
Next, never know.
get rain.
Hopefully it all comes at once there.
No.
Alright.
Hey, Lucas, can you read yourself? I want, you can speak. Once you first.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right.
Oh, that's
The ring.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
Almost like down by some.
I mean, I guess.
Yeah, with Adler, right? Yeah, we were at. Like Helen.
Right, across the street. Like to call this meeting to order. Let's all rise for the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Oh,
Matt McGarrett,
I'm here.
Michael Behrman,
Here.
Jamie Melky,
Here.
Kathy Macho. It's not here, and Nancy Rondell. Here. We have a quorum.
Fantastic. Citizens comment, if there's anything you'd like to talk to us about that's not on our agenda tonight, this is your opportunity. We do, need your name and address, and you do want to speak to us.
Real quick, Conley with the police department, I'm putting close because I'm heading to Marquette as soon as I leave here, but I'm 3.5 hour drive. Just want to introduce this is Officer Dan Steele, he was our newest officer. We sponsored him through the academy down in Kirkland, and he started with us full-time December 11th, I believe.
Yep.
And doing a great job. He's on his own right now and off FTO and working midnight shift for another couple of weeks, but you'll see him around once he gets on days and in the summer. But he's doing a great job for us and a great addition. He brings our average age down even more. When I started, our average age was 56, and so we're at 38 right now. Okay, now I'm the high end and he's the low end. But does anybody have any questions? We missed, well, obviously we didn't have a meeting at the beginning of April. We didn't have a meeting at the beginning of April, so I just want to see if anybody had any concerns or questions before I, or I stuck around because we didn't have one, so I just want to make sure everybody's all set. So we will start parking in around June 1st with a new system. Everything's going well on our end, so nice to be full staff. So, no questions, I'll be heading out. Dan will keep peace, so.
Thanks.
Drive safe.
Call me if anything comes up. Thank you.
Good. Anyone else for public comment?
It's a reminder for everyone on Zoom that if you would like to speak, please raise your Zoom hand. And we'll call on you.
Very good. It's consent agenda. Any public comment on the consent agenda? Yeah.
I have something, everything looks good, other than, I was just wondering if maybe we should revisit if Street Music needs to close the State Street. Last year, there was like a single musician almost every night there, and it just seems there's enough places elsewhere in town without having to close like the only two-way street to get from Main to Bay.
Do you want to pull that out for discussion later or just
Yeah, we can pull that one out.
pull it out? Yeah. Discussion.
Bonnie's here to defend herself.
She's on. She's
Oh,
on.
she does.
Yeah.
So is anything else on the consent agenda?
Otherwise.
So,
I'll make a motion to approve
with the
with
exception
the
of
exception of the street easy.
Second.
Roll call.
Roll call. Nancy Rondell.
Yes.
Jamie Melky.
Yes.
Michael Behrman.
Yes.
Matt McCarron.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Excellent, thank you. All right. Meat of the meeting.
So the first thing on the agenda in the city manager section is the purchase of striping equipment. And after I get through all these event applications, that was good. In the capital improvements plan and in our budget, we had allocated about $25,000 for the purchase of striping equipment. Normally, the DPW contracts out with a company to do the striping of our streets, and by striping, we mean like the crosswalks, the parking lots, or the yellow lines, the white lines that you see, the handicap spaces. That was at one point $15,000 per year, then $18,000 per year, then 20, and now it's up to $30,000 a year to contract with that, to do those striping for us. So what we had proposed in our capital improvements plan, the budget, is to purchase our own equipment. And that would allow us to stripe at a much lower cost. So we estimate about I got it right here, our guys probably would do it in a year, it probably costs about $15,000 a year. So the new cost of about $30,000 a year, which it cost last year, that's a half a savings in labor. But the cost of the equipment, we estimated in the high end to be $25,000. There's two pieces. One machine, I should say, is for the parking lots, small touch-up jobs. The second machine is for the long jobs, like the lines and the curbs. So the idea is that these pieces of equipment, the two striping machines we're looking for, can last anywhere from 10 to 20 years, maybe more. If they last on the low end of 10 years, we're talking about savings of over the 10 years, about $125,000, which is, a big savings from equipment from the street fund. Of course, if they last longer, the equipment, 20 years, you see a bigger return on investment. So at one point, it did make sense to use, contract out, because it was a relatively cheap cost, and our guys could do other things and focus elsewhere. But with the costs doubling to contract the service out in the past few years, it just did not make sense, and it made more sense to get new equipment. So we got two different quotes with two different options. There's a Sherwin-Williams Petoskey and a Sherwin Industries. The lowest quote came from Sherwin-Williams with Petoskey at $17,749. There's two options. See, option one and option two. Option one included, you see that's $18,000, so about $600 more. That was for one of the machines to be battery operated. The rest are gas operated. While it's a minimal cost difference, we still think that the gas powered probably are better for us, because you have to replace the batteries every so often, and it's just like additional maintenance costs over the years. So I think the battery options are good for some machines, but Lucas definitely thought that we'd probably be better with the gas machines just for maintenance and use. So that's my recommendation, is that we go with the Sherwin-Williams Petoskey option two. It comes in about $7,000 under what we budgeted for. And hopefully, these machines last us, over 10, 15, 20 years, and we'll get good use out of them. And then we also, another benefit to this is we regulate and control when we want to do the striping. If it needs to be done sometime earlier or later, like now we're all depending on the contractor, when they can hit us, is it May, is it June? It all depends on their schedule. So this gives us also more flexibility.
Well, public comment? Big stuff.
And do we feel that we have the personnel available to do it within our existing staffing and so forth?
Yes, we do. Yep.
Would they do it like early in the morning or late at night? That's like when contractors used to do it?
Yeah, they'll do their best efforts to do it when there's minimal traffic, so they're not, there's no conflict there, right? But,
There's no cars.
that's usually the best time to do it is early morning when there's less people and less vehicles there. But it also depends on, is the pavement wet? There's a little different conditions too, so, but yeah, that's the goal. I don't know if Lucas wants to add anything, but I think,
They don't have to do M118, right? That's done by the state.
Lucas, can you clarify, that last question?
Yeah, M119, the center line is what the state does. They do that every 3 years, roughly every 3 years. They'll come and restripe the center line, but all the parking and crosswalks is something that we have always done. So the state does not do that painting.
Okay.
And Lucas, to Jamie's question, when do you anticipate our guys, doing this? Normally in the morning hours?
Yeah, it'd be a combination. There's certain spots that we would definitely be doing during our non-scheduled hours. And there would be a little overtime involved in that. But that was included in what my cost estimate for us doing it in-house would be.
Lucas, does the cost estimate also include all the necessary materials, paint, obviously, or if we need new cones or barricades or anything like that, or is that all?
Yeah, we have all the cones and the barricades that we would need already. And I roughly, based on what this year's paint prices are, that we could probably do the entire job with the $15,000. Including the paint, and labor.
Thanks, Lucas.
Kind of a win situation.
Sounds like.
Yeah. And we have the storage space at DPW.
Do you need a motion?
Yeah, motion to approve, the recommended, option, which is Sherwin-Williams Petoskey for $17,749.
Make a motion to accept option 2 from Sherwin-Williams Petoskey.
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
All right. The second item on the agenda is a request by Don Marzellik, pronouncing that correctly. I called him to make sure. He has a request to upgrade and maintain an alley behind his property that parallels Maple and Lake Streets. You can see the alley here on the map. It's this area between these 4 properties on the Lake Street and the 4 properties on Maple Street here. This is the alley. He made the request. He had several reasons for asking the request. One of them is it becomes basically a muddy mess when it rains. He had some concerns about, kids falling in the polluted water and drowning. People are using it more frequently to access the back of their properties. People are using it for parking, which makes it difficult to navigate. He believes approving it would allow more emergency vehicles to go down there easier. Residents are plowing the snow and putting it in piles where they think is best. And he also believes there's too much focus on taxpayer funds on downtown properties compared to above the bluff. And believes they should be treated equally. And he said he spoke to 3 of his neighbors who are in favor. I did receive a letter, an email from a neighbor also who was in support. However, I haven't reached out to all neighbors. Not all neighbors know about this. I haven't contacted them because I was waiting for council's direction. So not all neighbors know about this request in detail. And he was hoping to have it at least done or considered this spring and summer. So one of the reasons that Mr. Marzellik brought up is that, the city's resources are spent below the bluff instead of above the bluff. And based on our CIP, this is kind of evident with where our projects are at, right? You see, here's a map of where most of the projects are happening, and a lot of them are below the bluff. We have a few above the bluff. And the ones that are above the bluff, these are for the next 6 years, right? We have Kiwanis Park, and you have the DPW building, right? So I think that's an argument we hear from a lot of different people. It's not just from Don. We do hear from different people that, there's more focus on downtown or below the bluff as opposed to above the bluff. But generally, two of the reasons for that is, one is we have more city parks and more city buildings below the bluff. So obviously we have more of our spending there. And we also have more traffic and vehicle traffic and pedestrian traffic. That's not a reason not to do more projects above the bluff, but that's usually how it ends up. In addition to that, I spoke to Chief Knight and Lucas, DPW Director Lucas. Chief Knight doesn't believe there'll be a benefit to regularly patrolling the alley because all the surrounding streets are patrolled. There's some belief that improving the alley will only or primarily benefit the 8 surrounding property owners. There's no water sewer lines there or fire hydrants, so really there'd be probably no need for the fire department to access that way unless we install one. But improvement costs could cost over $50,000. That's improving the drainage, grading, and paving. Potentially, you'd have to widen that alley to make it to our street standards if we want to actually use it as a street for other vehicles to come pass through. So there's a lot of different factors that, kind of, from the city's perspective, from the staff's perspective, not something that we'd consider high priority. We also have received several different types of requests from residents about upgrading and maintaining alleys throughout the town. We have at least a dozen, probably a bunch more. I haven't done an inventory of them. So we do have a lot. We do get these requests often. We also get requests to vacate them as well too, which is another option, right? If council approved vacation, then that person could take over that part of the alley and put it part of their yard. So there's a lot to it. I'll just say my recommended action here, but then I'll let Mr. Marzalek speak, on behalf of himself. But I think at this time, what would be appropriate, in my opinion, is for staff to take an inventory and look at all our alleys and see what their use is, what their potential use could be, what the cost would be to maintain them, what the neighbors think about how they use them and could be used. And if we had an inventory over an assessment of them, we could, put together a system where we rank which alleys, are that we want to, are higher priority to improve, and those that we might not want to improve at all, if we want to improve any. So that would be my suggestion, because I think we should spend some more time thinking about this. And, if we approve the request like this, how does it impact other people's requests? And of course, Kyle was just here, but Lucas is online too, if you want to hear more from him. So Don?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. It is a small alley, and as I drove around town and looked at a lot of alleys, there aren't a lot of alleys that aren't improved yet. There are several alleys up in our area, the one that runs between State Street and Harrison. It's been improved and taken care of. There's one between Short Street and Vine Street. There's just not a lot of alleys left that aren't improved. And if you look at our area up there, the lot sizes are really small. So to have a garage for like myself, the access from the back makes the most sense. You look at my neighbors on the other side, they, if they have more guests than they have parking for, they've got to park back there and again, we get a big mud bog in there when it rains in the spring. And it's just something that I think that the city needs to look at and improve and work towards. I realize that it's a small part and it's a big expense, but once it's done, it's done. There is more and more traffic coming down that alley with the neighbors accessing the back of their property. I mean, for me, the only way to get a piece of equipment in the back of my backyard is through that alley. And I know you said something about fire trucks and there's not a fire hydrant on that alley, but if you needed to pull a fire truck down in there in the wintertime to fight one of those garages that are back there, it's not loud. So you can't necessarily access it from Lake Road. You're going around all these cars and people's driveways and whatnot. So I think from a safety standpoint, it does make sense as well. I have talked to several of my neighbors. All of them are in favor of it. It's something we'd like to see done because as my neighbor to the west just built a nice fenced in backyard, and that's his access to his backyard as well. He doesn't have enough room on the other side of his house to access his backyard with a vehicle. So again, I'd just like you to consider it. I think it's something that would be valuable, you know, to keep in the city, rather than abandonment's not what we want.
Gotcha. Any public comment on that? So, thank you, anything else?
I think I like the idea of doing, if city staff could do some type of inventory of our alley situation and, you know, get a feeling for how many unimproved alleys are out there and, especially, if we're getting a lot of requests, it seems to me that we wanna, gather the facts and look at some data and, you know, that, I think the time to plan for that is when we're in the capital improvement process. You know, so that if that was something that council, you know, wanted to entertain, you know, there would be a plan and funds set aside, and a timeline and so forth. So I like that idea of putting together some figures and facts and that we could look at.
I think that makes sense. Or like a temporary fix as far as the parking situation, could we either like put a sign like on either end of the alley that says no parking, or send a letter to the 8 homeowners and say you have to leave the alley passable so that they all have access to the back of their property?
Good idea.
I drove it the other day, and it's a 2-track, it's an alley, I mean, an old fashioned alley. Most of you know, I'm supportive of the city hanging on to the property. I think it's a good idea, though, to take an overall look. I agree, rather than just putting fires out on each alley, because there are some other alleys in town that aren't approved. There's some big motorhome or something parked back there also that's very close to the alley. That's one of the things that constricts it. But again, I think we need to look at overall how are our alleys being used in the city and make some kind of choices about what we're gonna do to improve them. So I don't think it's something we should just go up there and do something major to. Yeah, if people are blocking it by parking it in it, that's really not supposed to happen on an alley. So maybe a sign and letters to the neighbors would make sense. So I'm in agreement with Michael, basically. I think we need to take a look at the overall and put it on, looking at it, capital improvement budget.
I also think that we should talk to all the homeowners, because I think once you improve an alley, it encourages people to use the alley. And so, you know, now you have anyone in the neighborhood using that instead of a regular street, or people are walking down it. So I think it would be important to get the input from all of the neighbors.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It wasn't in the memo, but contacting all neighbors around each alley that we have to see how they use it and what their preference is. And then that, maybe I think a letter to the homeowners instead of a sign would probably be more effective. I don't think we need a sign back there, but a letter, that letter could also explain this request to them, so to get there. Because Don, you said you talked to 3 neighbors or so. There's probably a couple you haven't talked to then, because they're right there. Okay. All right. So,
And the one we got the letter was on Lake Street.
yes, we do
Two
point
point
neighbors.
I also walked the alley, and the first time I looked at it, I didn't feel comfortable walking down it, and then I walked around and I saw from the other side and walked through it. So I do think that if you improve it, you're gonna get a lot more traffic.
Yeah.
That's the downside.
Which is what we're getting more traffic, you know, we get a fair amount of kids from the school that, you know, use it as a turnaround because they forgot something at the school, which is fine, I mean, it's, you know, it's an alleyway, you know. A little bit, you know, more traffic than what we get now is fine, because we don't have much there, but, you know, it's when we use it, so it's a public.
Right. Is it possible to make it even wide enough? Like, I don't know if anyone, if Lucas did measurements or anything, but is it even possible to be wide enough to code?
There's a garage.
Let me
There's
ask Luke.
some
I mean, it-
garage on it.
It's tight.
It's pretty
Looks
tight back there.
Hey Lucas, I don't know if you heard that question, but is it possible and what would it take to make that alleyway to street standards?
I would have to go do some measuring. It would be very tight to make it to the minimum street standards. That to put it on our street inventory, if you will, with the DOT. If we did, make it even not as wide as a standard street, there would obviously be some buildings and some other things that are very close to it. But I'd have to take some measurements to see. I know by the standard of the streets, basically, if we could squeeze it in there, it would be a requirement to have no parking on that street at any time, essentially.
Street would be
I don't
too
think you
much.
wanted a street. I think it'd have so many restrictions on it, you wouldn't be able to use it. It's like you say, you want to be able to use it, but I don't know what the standards for alleys are. I don't even know if there are standards. So that might be part of what we need to look at.
I think if you look at the alley that's between Short Street and Pine there, it's a pretty narrow alleyway there.
Yeah, it's one car.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's essentially what this should be, you know.
yeah. So, street.
Most of the other alleys in the city are about 20 feet in width, and then they pave one lane.
So it's a little right away on each side. All right, well, I think by consensus, do your inventory,
Send out the letter.
send out the letter.
Probably take a few months. It'll take us some while to get this, but we'll come back probably summertime. Definitely before capital improvements planning.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks for bringing it. to your
Thank you.
attention.
Good to know. I forgot about that.
Three C, I labeled it wrong, sorry, it says 3A on top. A tree board update, we have two different presentations. We have Dana Mulder, the tree board, to give a presentation on where we've been the past year and where we're going. And after that, we'll have a presentation by Ben Vealing, our city arborist, on maintenance. So, Dana.
Do we have a pointer picture?
It should be right.
We are delighted to be back to give you an update on what we worked on this past year and let you know what we're working on right now. My quote for this year is, "Somebody is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago." And that's Warren Buffett of all people. The trees that we see around Harbor Springs were planted. You see historic pictures where there are no trees. So I think part of our job is to work towards keeping a nice, healthy street tree population. So the vision of the tree board for the newer people trees are an important part of the city's character and provide numerous benefits to the environment, our economy, and our sense of well-being. As such, the city is dedicated to managing the urban forest by promoting community stewardship and by preserving and enhancing this essential resource for current and future generations. So our goals to accomplish this are: 1, build and maintain a diverse, healthy, safe, and attractive tree population; and 2, create a sense of stewardship of the city's trees among residents through opportunities for education and involvement. Just a brief background again for our newer person here. Tree board's been in effect for 10 years now. We've got 5 members. We're one of the smaller and maybe not quite so glamorous boards out there, but we think we get a lot done. Responsibilities that we've had and currently have are completing the tree plan, setting policy and establishing processes, providing input on vegetation management requests, educating and engaging the public, and increasing the city's urban forest. So what did we do last year? Lots. First of all, early in the year, we completed a plan for 119 where the trees came down in front of Bay Bluffs. There's a picture up there. I think it's going to be absolutely beautiful as it matures and won't interfere with the utility lines this time. We hosted our 3rd annual Arbor Day Fest at Kiwanis. That would be Victor pruning the tree with Ben there. This is an important activity to help us maintain our Tree City USA designation, by the way. We wrote and published every other month tree canopy articles in the newspaper. And the biggest thing we worked on this year was finalizing the City of Harbor Springs street tree plan. And I'm going to talk just for a minute about that. Picture. So trying to anticipate questions that people might have in thinking about this. First of all, why are street trees important? A big role is to separate cars and vehicles. They've been shown to calm traffic in studies, shading our sidewalks in our neighborhoods, and then benefiting the urban community, cleaning the air that. The second question is, why do we need a plan for this? The goal would be to create a well-designed, attractive, orderly streetscape. Make sure that the locations don't interfere with infrastructure. And we want to make sure that the trees that we put in are going to have the absolute very best chance at being healthy as they mature. Quickly on our process, we started out doing site inventories on all the streets, neighborhoods, corridors in town. We developed a planning unit framework where we had major corridors, secondary corridors, and then the various neighborhoods. And from there, we established priorities, like what streets needed trees the most. And that's kind of where we are right now. So we're in the process of thinking about community outreach, and then how are we going to implement this? How are we going to fund it? And this is just a little graphic. You can see in orange, this is what we determined were the major corridors. The yellow are the secondary corridors, and then we highlighted what some of the main neighborhoods are, with the thought that we don't want to focus just in one area, but to try and add trees throughout the city where they're needed. So here's what we came up with. One note first on priorities. Two of our biggest priorities, there's not much we can do about right now. One are the Main Street trees. There's not much we can do until something happens with the streetscape. And then the State Street trees, right now there's about 2 feet of boulevards, so that will not sustain a street tree. So you can see what we ended up with, the number of trees for each of the streets there, 57. And this 34,000 represents if a landscape contractor put them in. For example, if DPW did it, it would probably be about half that. We're also considering, I know that some of this could happen through the relief program, and some of it could be funded through grants. Our medium price, so we try and work through these first, and then our medium priorities, same thing. We have the situation on Bay Street where it's still uncertain about the wheelway and how that will get downtown. So we're not feeling like we can put trees in there, but another 29 trees in kind of the medium priority category. And so what could Project Kickoff look like? We want to do, as one of our first things, let the community know what we're planning, assuming council is in sync with us on this, and do an outreach plan. Look at different implementation options, like would we put some trees in through relief? Would we have contractors do it, DPW, et cetera? Come up with a maintenance plan, which Ben's going to talk about today. Apply for grants through different agencies. We do an Arbor Day event every year, so we're thinking this year that it might be focused on street trees and getting the community involved. And then we are here today to request that council fund the first 12 trees. And that'd be something nice that we could announce in the community, and a great way to get the program started. So then beyond this, what do we have going forward? So first of all, of course, the street tree plan, funding, implementing. We're starting a new really fun project, with a school system that we have a working name of Blackbird, Pocket Forest Project. And the concept of pocket forest has to do with creating, mini forests, throughout the city. So it's not just all single trees on streets where we actually have little pockets like we have right now, which is great for wildlife and, just a little burst of nature there. The superintendent has come to talk to us, so we're waiting for the next step on that. We'll have an Arbor Day Fest again. We're actually considering a community barbecue downtown. We probably will need somebody to help flip burgers or something. Yep. And we'll continue with the tree canopy columns. We do hear good things about that. We're looking at working with Relief on a community planting day somewhere. Rachel and I were just discussing today, maybe at Harbor View Park where some of the trees had to come down. That's at the corner of Hoyt and 119. And then partnering with the DDA on a streetscape project whenever that happens, and working with Parks for Trees. And so just leave you with, again, why are trees important? They clean the air, they moderate climate, filter stormwater, help with erosion, provide wildlife habitat and food sources. They create an identity and a sense of place, and they improve mental health and connection to the natural world. And that's it. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions? Doing a good job.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I want to add to that. So the tree board is asking for the city council to put in the first 12 trees. We do have several trees that have been donated in the past few years that we just haven't planted yet because we've been saving up as well. So we also have some donated trees that we can add to enhance that request as well.
It would be nice to get a feel for how you feel about that.
I think it's a great idea.
Good.
I like trees. Yeah, no, I think, you know, it adds to the community. That's what we're trying to do here.
And I
Make it a
think
better
there's,
place.
I think there's, you know, we have a tree board for a reason, and I think we need to support our boards. There's something to be said of getting it started, getting a little bit of a kickstart.
Yes.
That's not only, I think, a motivating factor for the board to pursue other avenues, but it says something to the community that, you know,
The
value.
city is committed.
Yes.
And, you've already got a bunch of trees donated in the past, haven't
Yeah.
you? Through DTE. and-
Yeah.
We have, and we've, through the Relief and DTE, they've got some money for that. They have told us, however, that, you know, they prefer non-linear plantings. You know, they've done it once for us in the spillway here. But they prefer to have, when they did this planting, when we did the plans over here, trees scattered different spots. So street trees are really not their primary focus, but we've looked at other funding options.
Parks.
Yeah. Yeah, so there are other options too we're looking at, but yes, we have received money.
We've had some big private donors for trees.
Yes, we
too,
have.
in the last 5 years.
West Main Street,
Right.
the White Oak, Swamp Oak, Swamp. Yeah, there you go, on West,
Yeah, that was a big.
some trees here out front here, yeah, so.
They're on the corner.
Is there any thought of where you would put those first like 24 trees? I
Yeah.
like, I know the priorities are there, but there's like 50 some or something.
Yes, yes. So what our thought is that not like just start out with Lake Street and do all those first, but rather, you know, maybe 10 on Lake Street and 2 on each of the other streets. And that, I think it's gonna be kind of a staff decision. There's gonna be locations where there's no trees, but maybe there's underground utilities there. So and kind of, some of that will be a little bit on the fly. We don't have like a map with individual locations.
Lucas
But we
did,
have
yeah,
places where there's big gaps, and then Lucas did do a preliminary, kind of drive-by.
to estimate how many trees could potentially go in, so. Yeah. Well, the tree board will let us know where they want the trees, and we'll try to see how many we can fit in there on that street.
And I'm glad some are up top. I agree that we don't always pay as much attention, and there's some neighborhoods up there that really don't have very many trees in it at all.
Most of them
It'd
are
be
up
much
top.
nicer, yeah.
All of them are Travers.
One thing that we think is very important is before we put in any more new trees, that we make sure we have a solid maintenance plan for them, which will include watering the first 2 years. We've all seen where trees have gone in and watering's been missed, and now the trees are either dead or, you know.
Is that included in the estimate of per tree? I can't remember. I read it.
Victor, was it maybe 3 years ago, we a price.
I
that would
remember.
Include some money for maintenance as well.
Yeah,
Um,
but I agree that there needs to be a plan to maintain, especially if we expect DPW to do some of it. You know, I think we need to really have a plan, because we have lost some trees that we planted. I know we have, because I don't plan them.
it
Yeah.
happens sometimes anyways, but
Yeah, but
I
I
want to
think
give them the best
we
chance.
want to give them the best, the trimming, the watering, all the whole thing that goes
That's
with
what
it.
the maintenance.
Yeah.
It
I
would,
think that's good.
I think it would be cool if you could make sure you plant, if we can plant trees before your Arbor Day festival. If you could plant a couple near where you're holding the festival, so that it's like, hey, look, we planted these trees, and maybe people will donate more.
Well, and we've had our first Arbor Day Festival, it's at the Spillway, right? And, part of the activities were planting trees.
We planted these, what year did, last year we planted.
Arbor Day actually, last year was something.
Oh, it's been a year before that.
We're thinking somewhere different
Yeah.
this year.
We do have, Mayor, I don't know if you want to approach this by, we do have a public comment, and then get public comment on this section and go to maintenance. Gretchen LaMarche, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Victor. Dana, Gretchen LaMarche, I live on 481 East 3rd Street, and I'm part of the Bluff Stability Committee, which is a group of 6 of us that are really working well together. We've only had one meeting, but I think we all share common goals, and that's about, communicating and educating ourselves about bluff stability and what is the cutting of the trees doing to the stability of our beloved bluff, but not only above but also below. And so I was just curious. I know that my daughter was part of that community planning day a couple of years ago, and we just really appreciate all that you guys have done for our community with trees. But we wanted to know, like, I was just thinking maybe if you could come to one of our meetings and present what you're talking about, because I think a lot of people think that trees are not important, that they don't create erosion if they're not there. But I'm just wondering, I'm not educated when it comes to soil and erosion. I'm just a person that lives in the community that wants what's best for our community. And I think the people above and below all feel the same way. And I think we're really fostering this idea about trying to understand the environment and doing what's best for our community. And I just thought maybe it would be nice to have you come to one of our meetings and talk to us about trees and how beneficial they are.
I'd be glad to, sure.
Thank you.
Public comment? Want to donate a tree? Get the ball rolling.
Thanks, Dana.
Thank you.
I guess before the band starts, I'd make the motion that we fund the first 12 trees.
And use up the other donated trees that we've had previously. Okay.
Do we have any idea how many there are?
About a dozen. Yeah, we've planted probably about a dozen since 2019. It's been about 25 trees donated, so. We had just been waiting the past few years. We also have some money in our budget to plant the trees in front of the lake and skate park. We planned the first section in front of Big Bluffs, and then to go down after the landscaping done is the skate park. So we'll get a lot of trees planted this year.
Second. Second. I think we can go all in favor. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I'm taking.
All right, Ben,
Pretty well.
or city, wherever you want. So you can stand up, it probably be,
Can we stand?
yeah, it'd be probably. I have here, this,
The only thing that I hate more than public speaking is PowerPoint, so. And some of this is gonna be redundant, and Dan actually very thoroughly covered a lot of the why, and so I think that's important. One thing I think that we haven't talked about a lot though is maintaining the trees that we have. It is an easy ask for a state agency to ask for grant money to plant a tree, but we don't get any help with trying to keep them alive once they're there. And the analogy I like to give customers is the easiest thing to do is to buy the dog. Keeping it alive is where the real work starts. With that, there's feeding, there's vet bills, there's all sorts of stuff that you have to do. And so Victor asked me to kind of touch on some of the stuff that we can think about comes after the tree goes in the ground. We really want to have high quality trees. And the reason for that is that it shields us from liability. I mean, if we have trees that aren't failing constantly, we don't have to worry about things like property damage or personal injury because we have trees that are well structured. And it also reduces our replacement interval. So a longer living tree is going to be something that we don't have to replace as often, which means we have lower costs involved with replacement. As Dan stated earlier, we have an interest in trees because they do a lot of biological mitigation. I mean, they sequester carbon well. They have a tendency to temper heat. So it's not just that they give us shade, but they also work as air conditioners. So the more trees that we have in the environment, the more they will cool the air and reduce overall temperatures, not just in shading, but in as much as 20 degrees in shaded areas because of the evaporations coming from the leaves of the tree. I mean, we can't do that with canopies or structures. I mean, we have to do that with a living plant. It's just how they work. They also work for wind abatement, and they're big, huge biological sponges for things like water and for some of the pollutants in the area. So, what they do is they just kind of suck up everything in the environment and they put it in some place where they can release it later. If we can keep the trees alive longer, it means that the air pollution and the carbon that we have as pollution stays sequestered and it's not being returned into the environment. As I touched on, lifespan is important. The longer they live, the less it costs us over time, and that's just spreading out our investment. If we start to think about like when trees fail and how they fail, what we see is a pretty common trend is that our failures are larger trees. And if we have a well-structured tree, that failure can be changed into a removal, where we're not worried about them falling in a storm or a wind event or something like that. We're actually looking at the planned obsolescence of a tree where it no longer works for what we need it to do. And then we can keep monitoring it. And then there's a point in which it's no longer useful. And we can, I hate to say euthanize it, but that would be the proper term, I guess. Whereas if we're not monitoring this stuff, what we end up with is the tree falls in a storm, takes up the power lines. We worry about things like secondary fires and injuries. And so our maintenance is something that alleviates a little bit of that. The other thing that we see is that with our larger tree removals and failures is that when we try to replace trees and the trees that we're talking about replacing or adding to the city inventory right now are small. And so there's not a really good relationship between a one-to-one removal and replacement system. We said earlier that we like trees and we don't see trees die, but in nature, we see something like 1 in 10 trees die every year, but there's such a huge proliferation of seeding and regeneration that forests can overcome that. In a city ecosystem or an urban environment, we don't have that. We have almost no natural regeneration. And so what we see is a big difference in biomass between the large tree that dies and the tree that replaces it. And then we may have as much as a century of backlog before those trees equal out into biological, into an equal biological benefit. So keeping the tree alive longer gives us much more of all the things that we like about trees.
And so, one thing it's hard to think about is that we like to measure trees by diameter, but when you think about size, it's not really a diameter function. It's gonna be the square of the radius times the cube of pi. So it's a huge, it's a huge exponential gain when you have a larger tree in the environment relative to many, many small trees. So two 10-inch trees is not the same as a 20-inch tree. Two 10-inch trees is more like a 12-inch tree, if you think about biomass and ecological benefit. So keeping older trees alive longer helps us out in a lot of ways. Last time we ran the inventory, the one thing we did do was note some of the things that we noticed for the common reasons why we had degradation to whatever that tree value was. So a lot of times when we're inventorying, what we'll look at is the condition of the tree and reasons why that tree is not in its perfect condition, or what could have been changed, or what we could change. And so, one of those commonalities that we see is that there's a lot of damage from improper pruning, improper planting, or improper handling. And, our maintenance goals should probably include education of the people that are handling the trees for the city. So contractors that are working on city property, city staff, we have a fairly limited amount of education that goes to city staff that are going to handle things like mowing around trees and installation. And then looking at and identifying things like diseases, we have very little of that. I mean, that's usually what Ben gets sent out to do, is look at diseases and insect issues. The other facet to maintenance would be thinking about trees' biological needs. So I'm respecting trees, making sure that, and as Dan pointed out earlier, we need to make sure we have enough space for some of these things. Some trees need a lot of space, some trees don't. And so we need to correlate that when we're working on our planting plans and our proposed goals. And then one thing we spend very little time with is correcting things like mineral deficiencies. In a perfect environment, we could plant trees. Trees would they're autotrophs, so they would take care of themselves. But in a manufactured ecosystem like we have in a city, we have to kind of think about, how does that tree get all the things that it needs? If we were planting row crops, we would do things like fertilize. We would add nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, because those are the three macronutrients that most plants need in very large amounts to stay moving. We don't have an organic layer that returns that in a lot of our ecosystems. And so, thinking about things like adding fertilizer to some of the plantings would be very helpful. One of the ways we can tie this all together is by having better data collection. We've talked about looking at liability and looking at things like which trees are hazardous, or which trees need to be trimmed, which trees would be, the next ones that we might possibly remove. And normally we correlate that with an update to the inventory. And so when we would have an inventory update, we would have condition ratings for all the trees that we would review. And then we can take that data and look at the ones that are the largest need and demand for things like corrective pruning, cabling, and or some of the things that need to be removed. And just about every time we've updated the inventory, it's usually followed by, calling them dangerous trees or trees that are severely damaged. One of the things that we see quite regularly is that we don't think about what the cost is for maintenance, and we don't talk about it because we correlate plants as being this thing that we put it in the ground and it stays there, we forget about it. But when you're talking about a large woody ornamental like a shade tree, one of the things we have to be really careful about is that at the end of that organism's life, it can be dangerous, right? A falling tree isn't like a falling daisy. It can smash people, it can smash cars, it can smash houses. And so, we find generally that, for every dollar spent for things like maintenance, we have a direct reduction in things like litigation against the municipality or the owner of the tree. We see minimized damages too. We see things like limb failures as opposed to stem failures or root ball failures, which basically what that means is that the more we take care of the tree, the thing that fails usually is something small instead of something really big and heavy. The reason that we, well, let me back up. I think that, you know, Deanna touched on public outreach, which, I think is really important because, you know, I get, sometimes I have to field calls for people that have questions about tree policy in the city. And I think part of a good maintenance policy is making some of this a little bit more available to the public. And I think part of that's just repeating the message. I think Tree Board has actually done a great job with that and being a good interface. I think that, you know, part of our maintenance needs and goals, though, should be that we spend a little bit more time talking about proper handling, planting, pruning, and making that available to both city staff and the public. I think those things are things that we've noticed as being a common trend when we inventory trees for the city, is that we have a lot of damage by well-meaning people that just don't have the information that they need to do something a little bit better than they're currently doing it. You know, the thing that we did see a lot of before we started working more aggressively with maintenance is that it was kind of slapdash and haphazard, and we would have a lot of failures that would result in power loss, that would result in infrastructure, and then in some instances we actually had threats of lawsuits. And part of the history and the reason that we started working with inventories for the city was because of we needed to be able to show that we were exhausting our efforts to try to make sure that we were keeping the public safe. We can't simply just say, well, we did some stuff. We have to have an organized way that we regiment that and implement that to be able to stand behind governmental immunity. I mean, if we're negligent, then we could lose that. I mean, say that differently. If we don't have a well-planned and regimented way that we implement handling the trees, then it's very easy for somebody to indicate that we've been negligent in keeping the public safe. And so that could result in liability claims against the city. And then the other reason that we originally started inventorying trees and working with trying to come up with maintenance goals was because, you know, in the early 2000s, when emerald ash borer showed up in Michigan, we had no idea what we had. So we didn't have a listing of how many trees we had in inventory. We didn't know what our maintenance goals were or what our maintenance costs were. And having dealt with the city of Petoskey, we found that they were looking at somewhere between 30 and 40% of their trees being ash. It makes us susceptible to one type of insect. And part of, I think, our maintenance and planting goals should be that we start looking at the 10-20-30 rule, which is that we don't have any more than 10% of our entire inventory being more than one species, and then 20% being one genus, and then 30% being one family. And the reason for that is things like emerald ash borer, very host specific. If we ever get Asian longhorn beetle, it has it has a number of hosts that it prefers. But if we continue to plant things like maples, especially autumn blaze maples, and we're going to be feeding bug, it's going to do the same thing that Dutch elm disease did to most of the state in the 70s. So that's about what I have. Can I answer any question?
Obviously a maintenance plan is important. I mean, I've been on tree board and we've been talking about it. So I guess it depends who decides on that maintenance plan and how we make sure it happens. And I don't have that answer. Obviously, I think it's a bunch of different people probably involved.
Yeah, I think, really it's really a staff goal to figure out, how to do the maintenance, but it's a council responsibility of, how much money and effort you want staff to put toward this maintenance goal. So that's really, we haven't had a traditional just set budget, be like, all right, we're gonna spend this much money on maintenance. We need to do this for trees. Usually and Lucas maybe could expand too, but much of our maintenance has been, let's ensure that if there's a dangerous or hazardous tree, it's not interfering with infrastructure or could potentially be hazardous to someone. So it's been with removing, trees. More lately, the past 5 years, especially with the tree board, shifting from just a tree committee to tree advisory board, it's been more of a, targeted, like, when we plant new trees, do we have proper water? Do we have, some more things in place to ensure some of this long-term? It's not perfect, but the tree board has been doing more steps to get there. But But yeah, so really that's what it comes down to is, staff doing, figuring out how and councils saying, how much we have to do it. And I'll say something about an inventory is, Ben and the tree board, have talked about, the inventory last couple of years. The inventory, is in the tree plan, but, I think the tree board wasn't, didn't feel like doing a new inventory was completely, a high priority thing. Ben's explained his reasons for why he thinks inventory is important. Some things that I wrestled in my mind were doing a rolling inventory, so you're not spending, $10,000 a year on doing an inventory every 5 years, but you spend maybe $2,000 a year on the inventory and update 20% of it. Then next year update 20%. So that way you put a little bit of money away and you have a rolling inventory and you're not you're not letting the inventory, just slip in the back of your mind, right? The last time we did inventory was what, 2014?
Yeah.
So it's been 10 years, so if we would have had a rolling inventory every 2 years, then every year is being continually updated and you don't come to this position where now we have somewhat of an outdated inventory.
Well, and I think one thing that's hard is that, it's really like our medical record for those sites, right? It gives us a history of what's going on. It is a wonderful way to tie in other attributes too. As Dennis said earlier in her presentation that watering is important. And so that's an attribute that can be added, right? We can add if there's an availability to irrigation or if there's a need for other things too, as we change trees out in those sites. But, the first thing you fill out when you go to a new doctor or dentist is your name. That's essentially what this is creating a file on each one of the trees that we're dealing with.
One of the things that the tree advisory board, also is, with the limited funds we have, is the best use of the money that we have available. And that's because there's been no set money available, just a maintenance plan. Is an inventory the best use of that money versus that money could go toward, other maintenance aspects. So it's, there's difference of opinion there, obviously from city arborists and tree board's goals, but this is what you have.
Well,
Would consider.
If I may add, one thing I would say is that we're not picking to manage or not manage the trees. We end up having to do this regardless of what we decide today or in the future. It just depends on what arena we do this in. If we're doing this with a reactive situation where, we clean up the mess when it happens, we're gonna have a lot more expenditure and we're already spending that money. We're just not taking it out of what we're calling maintenance. We're putting it in things like, when I was dealing with Tom, it was mostly, general fund, I believe that most of our funding came from. So we were spending the money, we just weren't keeping track of it. This would be earmarking it for something that would be a little bit easier to track, I think, in the future.
Seems like there maybe should be a way to combine the maintenance with the inventory. If you're going to go maintain the trees in Ford Park, be some way to, and I'm not the tree expert, as you guys know, but to say, okay, here are the trees that are here, and here's what we need to do to maintain them, and however the schedule gets set up to maintain them. Because I do think it's good to be proactive, but I also am not a proponent of spending $10,000 to inventory the trees in town myself. I think we need to take care of the ones we've already got here better than we have been. And I'm wondering if there's some way to roll that with taking an inventory of them park by park. Or, road by road, whichever ones you need to inventory.
Yeah, so I'd rather see the money spent on maintenance
I think
right
too-
now.
Right, I think too, like education, like if DPW needs to be more educated, spend the money on educating them to take care of the trees we have versus spending it on an inventory.
Yeah, in fact, we've talked about that,
Yeah, we have.
getting some of the DPW, learn how to trim properly,
And mow around them. those
mow
kinds of
around
things.
instead of weed whip the base.
And I think we've also talked in the past, like when we do plant new trees, to make a map so that DPW has a map to know where to focus their attention, because you don't necessarily have to focus on a tree that's been there for 10 years versus the tree that we just
The new
planted
ones,
needs
with
water.
Water especially.
You know,
So I think
stand-
like making a map that's just like, hey, we just planted these 24 trees, make sure that they get watered as much as they need to be. Like, I think before we do an inventory, we need to see some kind of maintenance
So
being done.
the question I would ask is how would you rank, measure, and disperse that? I mean, so the reason we use the term inventory is because we have a census of what we have. And we have roughly 1,000 trees in inventory currently. That's probably 30% of the trees on city property. Right, so figure we've got 3,000 to 4,000 trees that are on city property. How do you track all of that and make sure that all those goals are being met together? And that's really what the inventory does, is it may be that we're identifying a dead limb in an older tree that could be a potential failure hazard, which, I mean, if it falls in traffic or something like that, there's liability issue. And the first thing that'll happen is somebody will say, why didn't the city do something about this? Right, and it would be an obligation to explain why. Well, we watered these trees, but that doesn't mean that my car didn't get smashed.
Have we used our inventory, Ben?
Regularly.
Do we?
I mean, every single time we do an update, we almost always have trees that have to come out of the inventory because they're dangerous. I mean, because the risk is unsustainable. But we use that for looking at our demographic to know what we're gonna plant or how we're gonna plant it. You know, knowing what types of diseases may be on the horizon and what our exposure is, that's always because of inventory attributes.
But if we haven't done an inventory since 2014, for the last 10 years, how have we managed the trees that need to be trimmed or limbs that need to come down? I guess that's my question, because I know we trim trees.
We
And
do it reactively. I mean, we don't have a way that we can do a fair triage. I mean, we do that with complaint-driven response where people complain about trees that are causing problems. We do it with people that aren't well trained in things like tree risk assessment and failure potential. I mean, so like we're worrying about things like tropism, growth towards stimulus, but we're not identifying it correctly because that's the skill level that we have with the people that are doing it.
I guess for me, it's a balance between, I mean, I don't know that we've ever had a legal problem because a limb has fallen on a car. I can't speak to that, but.
And that's part of the reason we started this. I mean, we were threatened with a lawsuit because we had a tree fail on a car and we had no defense. We weren't able to say that we had expended money for tree maintenance and that this tree wasn't as dangerous as another tree in our inventory, right? If a tree falls on a house in the city of Harbor Springs, and it's a city tree, and we could say, well, we're covered under municipal liability, but the first argument that a plaintiff's attorney is going to make is that you spent that money incorrectly. So you're going to have to show that that tree was less dangerous than another tree that was removed or handled correctly, right? The obligation becomes ours to show that we've actually done something with it. We say we randomly cut trees and it's been identified by somebody that isn't trained in this to assess these things. We really don't have a defense for that. So there is an instance where that has happened. That was something that Fred Gooder and I worked on 20 years ago. So and we worked on that, I mean, consistently since then.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
So I guess, I didn't, as I wrote in my memo, didn't expect for any decision to be made, but I think it's something we need to start thinking about at the council is maintenance and how this all ties in with inventory. And but really the maintenance is a big goal of the tree plan. And that's, we want to, how we achieve that maintenance that we need to have, that's a question. There's diverging opinions on that and what's more important, but I think as far as budgetary purposes, I think I wanted to put it in council, you start thinking about this before budget time, and we'll start doing like things that I think when we talk about the tree board and with Ben and even Lucas is, training and public outreach are like two of the big things that we want to try to cross off this year. But it's focusing on specific trees, in our inventory that exists, like there's 1,000, like Ben said, and how do we ensure we're maintaining the trees that we have while maintaining the ones we're planting, the new ones we're planting, right? So anyway, I didn't expect there to be, but just something to think about.
Okay. It's a lot to think about.
Topic, okay. Well, next topic, another update presentation. We have Jeff Grimm here to talk about the zoning and assessing annual reports. And Jeff, we'll go with what's first. And it's the zoning administrative report.
Sure. And I think that actually works well because there's a couple topics in here that lead into the assessing report quite nicely. I'll keep it short and brief. We really didn't have as many reports of problems and there were decreased number of warning letters sent out this year. We had a dramatic increase in the number of building permits that were pulled and zoning permits. We did update our software, so we have some better tracking mechanisms now. We've been really busy with a lot of tasks, so I haven't had a lot of time to get in and really utilize that a whole lot, but I'm looking forward to doing that this year. So that's a nice improvement that I have available to me. Planning Commission has been still quite active, working through and submitting the updated draft of the zoning code to you. We're going to start moving into some new topics that'll be nice for this year. I don't have much else to add regarding the zoning administrator's report. Does anybody have any questions?
I appreciated the written report. It was good. Yeah, it was nice.
One thing I do want to point out is on that graph, if we look at that top green line, that is the number of zoning permits issued. Particularly, I want to point out 2020 and 2024, where we have a higher number of permits. And because that, I'm going to refer to that when we talk about the assessment report. If we want to move on to that one. The assessing report, the assessing season was pretty uneventful. We did have a pretty significant increase in the assessments this year. That is a trend that pretty much all of Emmett County is seeing. The more resort areas are seeing a higher level of increases than other areas. We're seeing that referenced in sales. We did have a decrease in the number of sales this year. We've been averaging between 50 to 60 sales each year. We were down closer to about 26 to 30 sales for 2023. And I think that's just kind of leading into what I've been hearing from a lot of realtors, where there's just a lack of inventory of available homes for sale. We see that in some of the other information in the graphs here, but I think what's leading to that, or because of that, we're seeing a lot of increase in vacant lands parcels now with permits being pulled for construction on those properties. So I think that's why we're seeing that increase in 2024 permits or 2023 permits that have been issued. New construction, if we look at that graph on the next page, Victor, we can see that we had kind of a peak and a spike that started in 2021 and really increased in 2022. When we look at the assessing practice and what we have to do, it really takes about 1 year to 2 years to see the value from building permits and zoning permits show up on the assessing record. So we had that peak of a lot of building permits and zoning permits back in 2020. And so we really saw that value come onto the roll in new, in new construction in 2022. We did see a decrease in the amount of new construction for 2023, but with the high number of permits that were pulled during 2023, I think we're going to see a resurgence of new construction probably in 2020, late 2024 and 2025. The DDA capture is doing well. Not much change there. It's a general trend moving in the right, increasing. Again, that's not a change in what people are paying in taxes. That's just where some of those revenue is going. And then at the bottom, we can see the assessed value and the taxable values for the community. Any questions?
Jeff, could you explain, we talked about this earlier, the median sales price, why it's, about 300,000 this year, last year, 2022 was over 600,000.
I think two things happened. I think during the course of 2021 and 2022, we had a lot of very high value properties sell. I believe for 2022, I think over 25% of the sale prices were over $1.25 million. Now that those properties have sold, we're seeing other areas within the city that are selling and property values are increasing. Along with that, with the decreased number of homes available for sale, we're seeing an increase in the number of vacant properties. Obviously, there's a difference in price with a vacant land sale versus a property with a home on it. So I think that's why that median sale price dropped dramatically from 2022 to 2023.
So 300,000 is less than the countywide. Isn't the county 360 or something?
One thing that I have not done in the past and that I didn't want to change it just on the fly right now was my median sale price has included vacant land in it. I think a lot of times when you're seeing that information on websites and on newspaper reports and things, I think they're pretty much looking at medium sales of homes specifically. And that's something that I'll look to do in the future, is to pull out and break out vacant land sales so that my graph is not unduly influenced by something like that.
Public comment? Questions? Yeah.
Explain a little bit more about the DDA capture.
Yeah, so the DDA is a defined area below the bluff. And the way that DDA capture works is certain millages within that area that are applied to that area when you pay your tax bill. What we did is we looked at what the property taxes or the property taxable values were in 2014 when the DDA was created. The city still gets all of the revenue from property taxes that were from basically that 2014 taxable value. But then any of the increase in taxable value since then for those properties is diverted and is able to be used by the DDA specifically for their projects.
Okay.
So it's not a change in the actual amount of taxes that are paid, whether you're in the DDA or out of the DDA. It's just kind of a direction of where those monies get to be focused on.
Is that, excuse me, commercial and residential bills?
Only, yes, but only for properties within the DDA.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, item 3E is the Little Traverse Wheelway project update. And I believe Doug Fuller's here too, in case you want to speak or after I do some speaking, but he's been involved with the Harborway Wheelway project for a while now. And he was kind of crucial to part of our negotiating with MDOT on using the spillway. But so, as you know, the bike path that the city is hoping to eventually extend to downtown, this has been in discussions, or under consideration, at least 20 years. It started really, this project started 20 years ago with Harborway as part of Harbor Inc. considering, which path to use to get to downtown. And they started examining alternate routes, and eventually it came to when the city was required to, or put in this spillway back in 2017, 18, when they were starting doing that planning for that. The idea was, well, let's make Zoll Street wide enough for a bike path here when we do that construction project. The Zoll Street sidewalk wide enough so it accommodate a bike path to eventually bring the bike path from where it's at in the park here by the ball fields to downtown. The idea is in the future to use Bay Street eventually as a bike path. That's an unknown. But at that time, it was unknown how we're going to get to Zoll Street. The idea was, well, we could use a spillway. That was when we put the spillway in there. There was always a thought that we eventually go to MDOT to use a spillway as a bike path because it's safer than crossing above grade. Well, when we approach MDOT, and there's some history here, we've gone through this to council several times over the 2020, 21, 22. But ultimately, MDOT was first hesitant to let's do any crossing, even using a spillway. They said it was built for flood water, wasn't built for pedestrians. Eventually, Doug Fuller with Harbor Inc. there spent over a year monitoring, collecting data there about water levels, keeping track of it. And we showed that data to MDOT, worked with Benchmark Engineers to provide designs, went back and forth with MDOT on getting a design that they would approve to allow us to use the spillway as a bike path. So the design you essentially see here is a result of negotiating and discussion with MDOT to get approval to use, a permit to use the spillway as a bike path. On this map, you see where the proposed bike path will go. The green is the current bike path, and then the purple would follow along the baseball diamonds and skate park, and we did receive an easement from the county to use some county land for the bike path. It was just a sliver of it, but we did get an easement from the county for that. Then would follow M119, cross Hoyt Street, and then do this loop into the shade drain. And again, this was part of discussions with MDOT. They wanted to see it, make sure it had the right grade for ADA and a bunch of different purposes. So that's why you see that big loop there to approach the spillway. Then you get to the spillway, you get on the existing path, which is the spillway and Zoll Street. And Zoll Street comes out, idea is release the bikes on Bay Street. The goal honestly was in the future is to, figure out which side of Bay Street we want to put the bike path. That's a future discussion, but it is a complex one because there's not a lot of sidewalk space on one side, and then on the other side, there's the driveways from the condos there. So it involves some thinking and some consideration of future projects that we might be doing on Bay Street as well, if we could coordinate and time them. There was, if Doug wants to speak later, there's a bunch of different alternatives looked at, crossing at Lake Street here, crossing at Hoyt Street, coming down Hoyt Street. So, and ultimately it was determined that using the spillway was the safest, and MDOT eventually agreed to that and actually preferred going under the spillway than crossing that grade such at Zoll Street. So right now we're here because we're obviously raising money for that, and there's been some requests to see more about what this is going to look like, because obviously this loop is going to be more. It's more than we envisioned, right? Originally, we're thinking we just go down M119 and turn into the spillway, but of course MDOT wanted to see the right approach there. So we had the engineering designs, and then we asked Beck and Rader to do a visual, and that's what you have here of what the visuals would look like, a rendering of what that spillway could look like. And there's 3 different viewpoints of what it would look like. Just gives you some sense of that. So anyway, right, this is really just an update. I would love, Doug, if you want to talk a little bit maybe about, what the monitoring you did and the kind of alternates that the Harbor Inc. studied a little bit. So give some council some more background.
Okay, thanks, Victor. I mean, I think you summarized it all pretty well. Regarding the monitoring, it was kind of a designed to be a double duty, kind of on the sly. The previous city manager, Tom Richards, didn't want to bollocks things up with MDOT, with that shade drain floodway project by seeing if they would approve it right off the bat. So we kind of designed it to be big enough for a pedestrian and bike underpass, and then tried to get permission so that, they were not real excited about it at first because, it's a floodway and, why would you send pedestrians through a place that floods a lot? Sounds like a real dangerous thing, but of course it's a very unique kind of flood situation, as you probably know. The shade drain floods just with a very, unique set of circumstances. So a cold frozen ground, which actually doesn't happen around here all that much due to our usual, not this winter, but usual deep snow cover. So anyway, with a scenario of frozen grounds and a deep snowpack, a rapid spring melt coupled with maybe a torrential rain event during melting, that's the kind of thing that would lead to the flooding. So it's really, like a once in a century kind of thing. And it would happen, probably in March when there's not much pedestrian or bike traffic. So anyway, they didn't really, I think, realize the nuances of the hydrology there. So, Harbor Inc. and, most of myself and some other members of Harbor Inc. and the community, we monitored rain events for a year and a half. And so we got rainfall data, and then we had some water monitoring tape, water indicator tape that was in a monitoring tube, so we could see how much water flowed through the culvert. And I think the maximum amount of water was like 2 inches or something. The water does flow, with the heavy thunderstorm, water does flow down the shade drain, gully. The watershed for the shade drain goes way up, like to Middle Road or beyond, up State Road, several miles. So it's a big watershed and, but anyway, just probably most of that water came from city storm sewers on Pine Street and Lake Street or, maybe some other areas. So anyway, it wasn't much water. It's probably no more water than you get on many city streets during a heavy thunderstorm. A couple inches, it's not a safety concern. So anyway, we're real happy that MDOT, saw the logic in that and issued the permit. And so anyway, things are kind of progressing now. Rachel, from your Parks Department has really taken a lead at coordinating things. And we have a committee of about 10 people that's kind of a sounding board for things, kind of not a, not like the tree board, it's not an official kind of entity. So the committee of Harbor Inc. that we've been working on this since 2010 when the Little Traverse Wheelway ended at Cossaquat Park. And, it's unfortunate that we couldn't at the time have the wheelway, the whole thing, what we're kind of calling the Harbor Way, but have the wheelway come right to downtown Harbor Springs or to the waterfront. But anyway, it just, that wasn't part of the project at that point. So anyway, it's a big price tag, 800,000 originally. So like in 2016 or 17, we were actually all set to go with a street grade crossing up by Tourist Park. So before you crossed the Lake Street M119 intersection, we had some plans drawn up for a crossing there with a little island in the middle. It would have been a pretty big project and pretty expensive. So when the shade drain project came along, we saw like a double win kind of thing. It would be a cheaper project and a safer project. Well, it's not, construction costs have just gone, skyrocketing in the last number of years. So it's not necessarily much, if any, cheaper now. Although, likewise, probably construction costs for the other one would have gone up too. So possibly it is still cheap. But anyway, the main thing is that it's way safer. Underpasses are way safer than street level crossings. And actually, I've heard and seen some examples of projects that, for instance, the state of Michigan through their grant program, recreational grant programs and stuff, things like that are really big on underpasses. And so there have been a number of pedestrian and bike underpasses that have received pretty favorable, grant review and funding recently. So, we're hopeful that the safety aspects of this project will, be a big selling point and, we'll be able to come up with funds through, private fundraising means, donations and fundraising events, as well as a number of grant funded projects. But that's where it stands now. And anyway, we've been really thankful for the city support. I mean, you guys have done all the engineering plans and drawings, just as part of your ongoing work with Benchmark Engineering. So, so far you have been a great partner, and we're really grateful for that. And we're kind of in the home stretch now with just getting $800,000 or so. Then I call that a home stretch, but we're hopeful that it'll come together, and in the next couple of years we can get this project done.
Thanks, Doug. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Oh, that's where we're at. Fundraising, as Doug said, $800,000 is expected cost of it.
Is the grant something that the city would have, like if the city were to pursue a grant, would the city have to apply for it, or could Harbor Inc. apply?
I think Harbor Inc. can help with the grant.
Well, actually, I think the city at this point, is going to be the fiduciary.
Yeah,
for this
it would
project.
be under our.
So in fact, the city is eligible for a lot more types of grant funding projects than an organization like Harbor Inc. is. So, I think the city would be the applicant and the recipient of grant funding.
Yeah, what we've discussed so far is that, yes, we would be probably best, we have more options, like Doug said, available to us for grants. But clear, the committee would definitely help with the grant application process. That's what they're there for, to support. So, yeah.
Is Harbor Inc. planning to help with phase 2 of like making Bay Street more?
Well, this has been a big
Bike
project,
friendly.
Harbor Inc. You know,
Yeah.
we were actually really instrumental in doing the wheelway, the last segment from the airport to Cosequat Park. And so, you know, I think that we would continue to be, you know, this has been a big project and a big success of ours. I would envision that we would continue to be involved in it. But I think this, you know, that'll be the final phase, so, you know, let's get this part done first, and then, we can tackle Bay Street and the
Yeah.
questions and different kind of problems there.
So I think it was good, just good to get a sense of the visual too, right? You know, this is what, you know, it'll be a change, right? You know, and so.
Yeah, it seems the entrance or the exit from the culvert.
Yeah.
A lot of reconstruction will have to happen there, obviously, because now there's walls diverting this 100-year flood into the culvert, and those, you know, all that henceforth,
Right,
the cost of the
That's
project.
why it's so expensive, it's
Yeah,
not just like making a 10-foot wide sidewalk, it's, you know, there's a whole lot of earth moving that needs to be done there. earth
Right,
change.
because right now there's a solid
Right.
wall.
Yeah,
And
and you can see in those,
Yeah.
conceptual drawings that wall is gone.
yes,
And,
yeah, the one drawing shows that, yeah, that one, the wall is gone, so a lot of.
And, you know, the landscaping and everything there will still have to be designed so that it would, you know, function as a floodway and, you know.
Yes.
So rare occurrence that a big water flow comes down there, you know, you're still gonna want the landscape to be protected against erosion.
And this design, again, was what Benchmark worked with MDOT engineers to get this
Right,
approved
yeah.
in order to use normally they have no control what we do on our property, but because we were asking for a permit to use M119 for crossing, they had a little more sway in how we designed our project. So,
Makes sense.
really no decision to be made unless there's any more questions or more, this is more informative.
I might add that like some of the next steps, maybe you guys know about it, but there's some informational signage that's going to be, we talked about putting up in a couple places at Cosequat Park, maybe one other location with some information about this project and, you know, something, you know, you could click on to donate if you want to. And also a map, like right now, there's still some confusion when bikers end up at Cosequat Park. It's like, well, where do I go now? How do I get downtown? How do I get to the ice cream shop? And so there'll be some more directional signage associated with that. And then our committee's also been talking about some different kinds of like fundraising of, you know, awareness events, maybe something associated with the grand opening of the skate park. That will, since the bike path will run right by there, so you know, some things, some event type things that we could raise awareness and hopefully get some donations towards it.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it. All right, we're ready to move on to the next. All right, before we go to the next topic, we did add, I forgot, street music. I don't know if you want, probably might be a simple one, or you want to wait until we add it after appeal from Maureen Penny. It's up to you. You want to just do the appeal first and then?
Yeah.
Okay,
Over.
that's the engineering. Okay, so Maureen Kenny had submitted a FOIA request for several different documents. The requests included all emails and documents from city staff, relating to the RRC, grants we received from the state of Michigan, taxes paid by each taxpayer from 2022 and 2023, correspondences related to proposed zoning code, and all checks written to consultants since 2019. So it was it's a pretty extensive FOIA request. We responded, we approved the FOIA request. The total cost was, we calculated to be pretty close to $10,000. It included the labor costs and actual cost of copying and duplicating records, the breakdown of the employees' costs to perform the test to ensure compliance with the response at a rate of the lowest capable employee for that specific task, and also included attorney fees. The appeal said they would like the documents emailed instead of physical copies, which it wasn't clear in the first request whether they wanted physical copies or email copies. So I included them as physical copies in our response. There's suspicion that there is lower employees at a lower rate capable of doing the work. They said the attorneys' time can't be used, and they requested more documentation. So after reviewing the request, the appeal letter from Ms. Kenny's attorney, we did eliminate section 4 and 5 costs. These were the costs related to physical like actual paper and ink, as well as mailing costs. As I said, wasn't clear in the original whether they wanted paper or email. We put paper down. We can eliminate $810.40 for the FOIA request for that. The labor cost for copied and duplicating records, we estimated at the, in our response, it was going to cost about 30 hours at the lowest wage employee capable of doing this work, which was Tina Honeysett, who's our cashier, deputy treasurer at the front desk. We estimated about 10 hours to print and compile documents, 15 hours to print and compile email related to the request, and the copying of physical records that aren't on our employee accessible drive or email server, such as in boxes, such as for the checks that we send out to consultants. That would take about 5 hours to copy those. Because there's no longer a need to print documents saved on our drive, we can eliminate printing that from the cost itemization, so the labor to print. However, we still need to make digital copies of those documents and save them, such as, for example, we need to compile emails. So instead of printing and compiling emails, we need to save and compile those emails. So, but we still can reduce that time down. And while we no longer need to copy physical records, not save digitally, we would need to compile and scan those that are into our system instead. So we still have that hours to scanning those, for example, copies of checks and other documents we might have that aren't on our system. So overall in that section, though, I think we can reduce the work because we're no longer making physical copies from 30 hours to about 20 hours of work for that section. So my recommendation there is to eliminate the $833.60. Eliminate about $400, reduce it down to $833.60 for that section. Ms. Kenny, our attorney, had a question about whether or not we were using the lowest hourly rate of an employee capable of performing the task. In our cost itemization that we provided with them, we did use the lowest hourly rate of employees capable of performing each specific task. This was determined by discussions with department heads and employees. I emailed had discussions with staff about how many hours, how many emails they might have, how many documents they might have on their system. Did a rough calculation of how long it would take to search and examine those records and then compile them. We also, when we're looking at the lowest rate capable, we're looking at several things on who has obviously the ability, the capacity, who has the knowledge, training, and qualifications to do those tasks. Sometimes the lowest paid employee is not always the person who's capable of doing it. And sometimes the lowest rate capable is someone who's higher paid. And this is going through emails. We have an email policy in our city personnel policy that no one should share passwords or access other employees' emails. So I cannot have a lower rate employee, search through my emails. There's also sensitive documents, legal personnel documents in my email system that someone else should not be privy to. So there's several reasons why we have chosen how many hours each employee gets is attributed to doing the work that's requested here. Another example is going through checks written out to consultants. We do have Patty Sutton who can obviously find the checks but we need someone to tell her, who's a consultant versus who's a vendor versus who a contractor is. There's things that certain employees have different capabilities, and we talked about that. We thought about this pretty seriously. I emailed Jeff, I emailed Rachel, I emailed all employees involved, asking them for their feedback on how long this would take. So I believe what we have there for those employees and what they're primarily necessary for, which is here on the screen. I believe I'm using the lowest rate capable. They did have a question about attorneys' hours, saying that those cannot be included in the cost itemization. And there is case law out there that says, that there's a test for determining whether someone's a city employee or a city contractor. And the test is not simply, there's like an 8-prong, there's a multi-factor test. And it's the most conservative viewpoint here is that the city probably wouldn't classify Jim Raymer, who is our attorney, who's been our attorney for 45 years, but he's not technically a city employee. So the safest test there is that we'd probably be safer to not bill his time for reviewing and examining the records because he's not a city employee. For example, also council members, planning commission members, other board members will have to go through their emails to find documents. We don't get, we can't charge for your time. You guys aren't paid city employees. So there are certain things we just can't include. And so we recommend taking that $825 off of Jim Raymer's time. So my recommendation is to reduce the fee by $2,000, $2,052.20, which brings the total cost to $7,695.60. And also that would reduce the 50% deposit fee. There's a test in our FOIA and our policy of, you shouldn't be charging for FOIA requests, for requests, unless the request will result in unreasonably high costs to the city because of the nature of the request. And then they have 5 different prong tests for, or factors for, how you should determine whether or not the cost is unreasonably high. One of them is the volume of the public records being requested. In this case, we at least 1,000 documents and emails and over 5,000 sheets of paper. So there's a lot to go through. The amount of time spent to search for, examine, review, and separate exempt from non-exempt. We didn't have any exempt or non-exempt, so we weren't, that we know of, so we weren't worried about that. Whether the public records are for more than one city department or whether there's various offices involved, the available staffing to respond to the request, and any other factors. It's, one of the tests too is also to look at, how does this FOIA request compare to the FOIA requests we normally get? Last year, for example, we've had 5 official FOIA requests. And what I mean by official is people who sent, we're looking for a FOIA request. Sometimes people just email us, do you have a document? And those we just, if it takes less than a half an hour of work, we just send them the document. Last year we had about 5 FOIA requests. 2 were for over $100. One was $130, one was $150. This is, drastically more time and more costly to the city. So when you're looking at it from that compared to what our normal amount of normal time it takes and normal cost to the city to execute this FOIA request, it's much more significant. As mentioned, how we meet these standards or these factors, over 1,000 documents, several thousand pages of documents, emails. Of course, this is an estimate based on speaking with department heads and staff, how many emails they have and how many documents they have. It could be more. We generally take a conservative approach when we're doing our hours estimate, so we don't go over. It will take at least 90 hours to search for, examine, and review the requested records. We do have multiple city departments to go through. We have city manager, city clerk, zoning administrator, parks department, even the police department and fire department, because we have 2 of them that were on or are on the RRC committee. So I inadvertently left those costs out of the FOIA request. And then we also have a small office staff who have many other duties. Complying with this request will require taking them away substantially from their normal and regular duties. So that's part of the factors that we look at. So the process here is they appealed. Council basically has 3 options. They can waive the fee, council can uphold the fee or reduce the fee, as I recommended reducing the fee, or to another fee, you know, depending on your analysis and what you've read here. For those really the three options. If at that point, the Kenny still have the, Ms. Kenny still has ability to appeal that to circuit court, and the circuit court can then decide on whether or not, you know, the fee should be reduced further or upheld. If the circuit court feels that that this fee should be reduced by 50% or more than what we're proposing here, they can also have the ability to grant attorney's costs to the lawyer, if that's what they decide to do. Or if they determine that we've arbitrarily made up these fees, they could issue some sort of penalty. I don't believe we didn't arbitrarily come to these fees. We spent a lot of time thinking about them, a lot of work into it, and I'm also confident I stand by the work and analysis I put into this. So it's just my recommendation is that we do, based on analysis above and updated information provided by Maureen Kenny through her attorney, I do recommend council certifies that the statements in the above determination are accurate and that the reduced fee amount of $7,695.60 complies with its publicly available procedures and guidelines of section 4. So if Ms. Kenny or her attorney is present to speak, but we did notify their attorney that this was on the agenda for today.
Comment? Bill?
Is the ultimate bill based on the actual time? Or is this like we're making a bid?
If it's less than what we estimate to be, we will bill them less, but if it's more, we won't bill them more. Unless, and I would have to talk to Jim Raymer this, unless there's some substantial amount of information that we missed in our initial preliminary search. But that's why we've done a pretty thorough search of asking every department head of, you know, how many documents they think they have. Example, I missed the police department and the fire department, but you know, they've only been on the receiving end of emails regarding to RRC when we have meetings, so they wouldn't have as many documents, you know, so I'm not really worried about that excessive cost.
Is there any consideration to arrest the taxpayers in the city and taking city management and staff away from what they do, using taxpayer money to support this? This is a federal law. We don't really have a choice.
This is state law, and this is this is their right, absolutely right. Everyone has a right for FOIA. They do have a consideration for amount of staff time and money will cost, and that's why they have these different tests and factors for determining fees. And there is really no timeline that, you know, we have to deliver it by, but we try to do it as efficiently, as quickly as possible. We estimated probably with the amount of hours, we could probably get it done within 1 month of getting approval.
Obviously, Victor's done his homework. I mean, I read all this at home. You know, I think we need a motion to support what, I don't know how to say it.
You would need this motion because the motion is to certify basically anything that would be in my memo.
Okay.
So basically this recommended action is motion to certify the statements in the above determination are true and reducing it to that amount. This is there.
What can I say? I would move that we take the recommended action to reduce the amount to the $7,695.60 and move forward with it.
Second.
We're doing a roll call. So Jay.
Nancy Rondell,
Yes.
Matt McGarren,
Yes.
Michael Barron,
Yes.
Jamie Melvin,
Yes.
motion passes. Who was our second?
Mike.
Thank you.
On the FOIA request, are we bound to, can we say record search is $100 an hour?
No, so you have to use the lowest rate, the rate of the lowest employee capable of doing that work. So, no, you can't just arbitrarily assign a dollar amount to it. And the law was revised, well, amended a few times in the past, well, in 2015 or 16, I can't remember the latest revision, but it was revised to account for that because there were municipalities and government that were just exorbitantly adding, using their highest paid employees to do the work, even when they didn't need to use the highest paid employees.
Do they have to have when you do a FOIA request, do you have to have a reason for what you're asking?
No
for?
reason required.
Okay,
If it's a public document, it's for the public. No reason is needed to distribute it. All right, I think then maybe we move on to street music. Yeah.
The meat of the meeting.
So Bonnie is on Zoom. So I guess the request was, Jamie Melky wanted to have a discussion about whether or not we should close down State Street or look to how we can close down State Street if, depending on who's performing. I don't know, maybe Jamie, you want to say it better than I did.
I mean, as far as I understand it, we started closing that street down because of COVID and to allow more social distancing. And it just seems to kind of congest downtown, and people are using alleys to pass through because the only other way you would have to go all the way down to Hankey or to Judd to get out of the downtown area. We lose parking spots. So I just question if it's necessary to close it down or if there are plenty of other places downtown that we could put the musicians instead of closing that street down.
Bonnie, I'm gonna ask you to unmute yourself if you want to talk a little bit.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Actually, I since this was a foundation thing, I don't have all the exact details, but my understanding was that originally Mayor Bugera was very in favor of this because one of the reasons, and I don't believe it was because of COVID, it was that you did not like individuals outside of the entrance to your place of business. There are not a ton of places around town for us to have the musicians. This has become a very popular spot, and it gets the musicians off of the sidewalk and out of the way of individuals trying to walk by. When a musician is in front of, whether it be the New York, Pearson's, Bar Harbor, it blocks patrons from coming and going, and that becomes a problem. I become very concerned if we don't close State Street and we still have a musician in that area, that individuals will, not thinking, just walk in the road or walk between cars. And I would see a real safety issue with that. Obviously, I'm in favor of it, but and of the 9 weeks, we are not requesting 3 of the weeks. So it is only for 6 because there are other weeks that either we're only going to have one in Marina Park. The one will be moved to a different location another week. And the third is the 4th of July. And we understand that that would be far too restrictive. And so we will move the person that week. I've found it to be very popular, but it's obviously up to you all.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Yeah, I did initially ask for the street to be closed for street music, but my goal, I guess, was to make it more of a party scene, to have a band, people in the street, eating, drinking, doing whatever. And the last couple of years, pretty much all we get is a guy out there playing a guitar, and half dozen people milling around. And it just doesn't. It's not working out the way I envisioned.
I also think it takes time away from DPW to bring all of the barricades and signs down, and then the police have to go set them up and then take them down, and DPW picks them up the next day. That I just think that if we're looking to save on city resources, that's an easy way.
And it does gum up the parking and the traffic flow. If there's a reason to shut down the street, if Jelly Rolls is playing,
Yeah, I was just gonna say if there's.
that would be a reason to shut down the street, but Joe, the guitar player, not such a draw. Why do you close the street to it, Carol?
Could you, Carol Winter at 141 Snyder Street, could you look at putting that band or that one individual at Zorn Park?
Well, that's typically what they do. Like if Jelly Rolls plays, they put them down in Marina.
But they're at Marina Park. But I'm just saying maybe instead of shutting down stage.
We- There's not good electrical in Zorn. Am I still unmuted? Okay, good.
Yeah, no, you're good. We can hear you.
Yeah, so Zorn Park, the only electrical I have found, and I don't know if Lucas is still around. There's a light pole up on Main Street because that's where we do the movies. And so we're very limited as to where and how we could have someone. And I'll be very honest with you, even though town is small, people tend not to walk that far down. They tend to stay within the one block, right? They'll do the circle and walk their way around. So I mean, we could look at other thoughts and options.
Just that was gonna be my question. I have two thoughts. One is, first is, do we have an idea of what bands or musicians may be playing there? And second is, what is an alternate spot? And maybe not to, put Bonnie and the chamber on a spot right here because it is some thinking. Maybe we approve the event with the condition that we relook at the State Street location and come back to another council meeting because I want them to have their lineup set for the summer, but also give them some time to do some research and maybe bring back some of that information on who's playing, and maybe council can think of some alternative ideas where that musician can go, and so can Bonnie, unless we come back and decide, maybe State Street is good for maybe a few times of the, maybe not all six, but that's, I would say, I think we need some more time maybe for the chamber and council to think about it.
I think that and like having an idea of who's gonna be there, like you said, if it's a 6-piece band, then it makes sense, but if it's one person with a guitar, it doesn't make sense. Like I watched so many times where there were 4 people watching one musician and they're playing to an empty street and it's depressing for them, I'm sure. And, and just watching it. So that is why I just question if it's necessary.
Well, let's see who they line up.
Yeah.
Maybe what the plan is for that corner.
Yeah, no, that's
See.
fine. Well, we don't have to
That
decide
makes
tonight.
sense.
I think it's before we approve shutting down the street every Thursday night. Yeah, it'd be better if there was a reason to shut down the street. It's like farmer's market. You shut down the street because there's 1,000 or 100 people, 1,000 people there. Why shut down the street if there's 6 or 8 people?
Well, I think, I guess I would recommend a motion approved without the State Street location, then come back at another meeting for a further discussion or review of the plan.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Yeah.
Aye. Opposed?
All right, Bonnie will be in touch.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Next on the agenda. We're almost done. We have an appointment for a committee. We received an application from Danny Roter. I think he's here. He's in the back there. He stayed through the whole thing. I emailed you the packet separately, his application and his resume and all that. And he's very committed to serving on a board, wanted to participate, be involved. He lives on Main Street. And so the one opening that we do have right now is a public spot on the RRC committee, which we've never been able to fulfill that. So right now we're working on economic development strategy. So it's going to take, quite a bit of time. So I think it's a good time for someone to come in and to start contributing some ideas for the public. So I think it's awesome. So I'm recommending Mr. Roter was definitely willing to serve on the RRC. Give it a try. So I'm recommending we appoint him to serve on the RRC. Yeah, we need him, or consensus is fine.
I
talked to him already about it. Yeah, that's great.
Very well qualified. Yeah,
Yeah, very well qualified.
Yeah.
Yes. Very much so. And thank you.
congratulations.
So you make that. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
Okay, getting to the end here, city manager's report. Few updates. Water line verifications have begun. About 300 property owners received notification last fall. So there's been some time that's elapsed, but so last fall that we would be physically verifying its water lines to comply with state rules. I've had a few questions about it. But basically the city must dig up portions of the right of way in front of people's properties to physically inspect the lines. Our letter to people said we were physically verifying the lines. We didn't actually say we're digging property up in front of there. So next time we'll do a better job of making sure exactly people know what we're exactly doing. But we are physically inspecting the lines. Doesn't mean we're digging up city right of way property to inspect our water lines to comply with the state rules. That we will restore the property, the grass, any broken irrigation back to it was beforehand, but we did have a couple questions about that, so I wanted to clarify what that was about. Spring cleanup has begun. The details will be posted on the website.
Oh, do you know when they're gonna fix all of those giant holes?
That's a good question. Lucas is still
I mean, just because people are riding bikes and.
Lucas, can you go?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's raised his hand.
Just curious.
Yeah, we started that with the weather being nice, and then we had to hold off on the concrete when we had that real cold snap. So we will be getting to replacing that sidewalk very shortly.
Lucas. Spring cleanup has begun. Details will soon be posted on the website. We have posted our bid package for the substation transformer. I expect that bid to come to council on June 3rd to select a transformer. The surveys of the Everard's property has been completed. So the city's electrical engineer, GRP, is working on a design to determine how much land is exactly needed for the real estate deal there. So we'll have more information once we have that design finalized. We can go back to council with that. Well, we'll connect with the Everards and then come back to council with that information. We also mailed over 75 letters to lawn care companies, contractors, and construction companies that regularly or occasionally do business in the city to inform them of last year's noise control ordinance that we updated. It was meant to be a proactive measure. I talked about it last year too, just to make sure that those who do most of the work in town know what the rules are to mitigate any complaints and friction between neighbors there. And there's something cool we're doing here is we're working with the Tip of the Mid Watershed Council to employ the Bee-Bot at Zoll Street Beach and City Zorn Beach. It's a eco-friendly beach cleaning robot that mechanically sifts sand, rakes seaweed, and the level sand areas to remove plastic waste and other debris without harming the local environment. So it's not a cost to the city. It's just another way that Tip of the Mid Watershed Council is trying to be proactive and using proactive technology and new technology to keep our environment clean. So we'll see how it goes. If you see a robot out there, there'll be a staff member there. It's just something neat. We'll see how it goes. Either it will work or it won't work. It might get eaten by a dog.
I would imagine it's gonna get eaten by a dog. Tell them to refrain from going there during those hours.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they'll be working with Rachel and DPW on that one. So at the Parks Board discussed skate park, playground landscaping, had a successful Easter egg hunt. The Bluff Stability Committee held its first meeting. They talked about their initial thoughts, questions discussed, and now this meeting on Wednesday, they're having one. They'll be going over some of the studies and assessments that consultants and other people have provided through the city and county over the course of the last couple of decades on bluff stability. One of them is from our city arborist as well. Planning Commission met to approve minutes. This Thursday, they're meeting to discuss sign ordinance language. Not to vote on it, but to start beginning the discussions on it. The DDA discussed the Merchants Walkway, website improvements and wayfinding. The RC Committee, as I mentioned, discussed economic development strategy, memo on credit cards. So there's a few MPPA and CCE meetings, nothing out of the ordinary for me in the past month. And there's public comment at the end, submitted from residents. I guess we're on city council old and new business.
Anything on? Michael? That's for me. Thank you all for coming. Meeting adjourned.
You.